the next session on the economic outlook and recovery for women. And it's no secret, we shared some of the numbers earlier around the impact that the pandemic has had on women, and the COVID-19 recession disproportionately affecting women. And actually 100% of jobs lost in December were women leaving the workforce. The outlook isn't all bleak, but we have to tackle this, and we have to think about the actions and what we can do to scale. I am thrilled to be on the stage and introduce Liz Hilton Segel, Managing Partner at North America for McKinsey, and also Cate Luzio, Founder and CEO at Luminary. Hi, both.
Nice to see you.
It's great to see you. Let's jump straight in. We know COVID-19 has disproportionately affected certain groups, including women. What can we expect as far as the economic recovery for women? And Cate, let's start with you, because I know you've covered this a lot, and I know it's a topic that you're incredibly passionate about, and I want to get straight to kind of where we are and what we can expect.
Yeah, and thanks for having me, and excited to be here. Listen, I think the reality of the situation is it is still bleak, and it's not getting any better if we can't get women, the 5 million women that have been displaced or left the workforce, if we can't get them back into the workforce, right? Those jobs fuel economic recovery. The recovery of this shecession or recession will be a lot slower if we don't have those women back in the workforce. In order to do that, we need policies and programs, not just written by the government, but by companies that do employ large groups of women. We also have to remember, and Juliet, you and I have talked about this, about minding the gap. The gap is not just the gender gap and the pay gap. It's also those women that are still in the workforce, those women still leading businesses, building businesses, they also need support just as much as those that have left the workforce. And so whether that's reviewing people practices in companies, whether that's looking after all of these women that are entrepreneurs, how are they getting access, not just to funding, but financing, core financing and resources and education. If we don't start with the basics and collectively do this, and I love what Maren said, at the end of the day, it's each of us that have responsibility for this, right? This is not just a women's issue. This is a societal issue that's affecting us. It's affecting our companies. It will affect long-term our economic recovery if we can't get them back in jobs.
Thanks, Cate. And Liz, welcome. You've covered this at McKinsey in terms of the impact on women in the workplace. Just share with us what long-term impact the pandemic is going to have on working women before we get into some of the solutions.
Yeah, I mean, maybe just also add in terms of the context of what we see of what's happened during COVID. One of the things that we asked working women is what was their additional workload in terms of domestic responsibilities because of the stoppage of schools and that kind of thing. And you saw a situation with more than 40% of mothers with young children described an incremental 15 hours a week of work when women are already doing more, and we know that. And so that's a little bit like saying, please have your full-time job and your part-time job on the side. And I think you're seeing that emotional fraying. And so when Cate was talking earlier about the fact that we have women leaving the workforce in material numbers during COVID, and that quote or that expression of a she-session is a real thing that has happened, our estimate is that we won't see employment for women return to pre-pandemic levels until as late as 2024. And I think the reason why that's significant, obviously it's a disproportionate impact on a population, but I think the reason why it's also significant is that during that time, in addition to the fact that those women are not earning and therefore they're putting their own households in a economically less advantaged context, but it also means they're not picking up skills and experience. And as they re-enter the workforce, they may re-enter the workforce with maybe more uncertainty or potentially even a recession in their own skill sets. And I think as we think about trying to create programs that allow for employment in a truly inclusive way coming out of this, we do need to be conscious of what this experience has felt like and what people will have the capability to do as they re-enter.
And I'll just, Liz, you know this, I mean, there's already, for women that take a break in their careers, right? Whether they're leaving for elder care, their kids, whatever that is, there's already a stigma, right? So when they go back to the workforce, there's the question that everyone asks, what's this gap in your resume, right? That's already put you behind. You're already going to be behind from an income level, experience level. So this, when these women may have not been able to control their leaving, may have had to leave, to your point, given the amount of workload, they're already at a disadvantage. So if we can't keep them tethered to a network, tethered to ongoing education and resources and skills and a community, then that 2024 could be elongated.
And I think, one of the things that gives us pause is particularly when you're looking at the impact on executive level women or senior level women in companies. There's the direct impact on company performance of that. And, we've published quite a lot on the correlation between diversity and overall company performance. But in addition, there's the fact that often senior level women bear a disproportionate role in the culture of the organization as it relates to promoting diversity and inclusion in terms of creating a culture that's explicit in its inclusive actions. And they tend to also play a disproportionate role in mentoring and sponsoring folks of color. So as an example, 38% of senior level women currently are the mentor or sponsor to one or more women of color, compared to only 23% of senior level men. So when you lose women at the top, when they're already in short supply, it actually creates a downstream impact on the organization that's difficult to recover from.
And I think one of the important things that you've said is that women always kind of had that second shift, right? Which was
now it's the third shift, exactly.
And now it's like, yeah, which is tough. And then you're adding third shift on without access to things like childcare and having to teach. What short-term solutions do you think women can implement right now, to help them survive the current situation, but also to think about re-entering the workforce in a way that's sustainable and not going to break you?
So, I mean, look, one of the things that we're doing, and everyone within McKinsey knows, and I've published on this a fair amount, is we are really on a campaign to treat well-being as a skill. So in the same way that professionals learn skills of all kinds, they learn communication skills, they learn leadership skills, they learn entrepreneurship skills. Companies have been teaching people skills for a long time. There's no reason why companies can't play a role in teaching the skill of well-being. If work has the capacity to invade your life 24 hours a day and 7 days a week, then there is a responsibility on the behalf of employers to cultivate well-being as a skill. And what I share with colleagues in my organization is that it really is not an indulgence. It is simply a way of leading one's life such that you are at your best for your colleagues and for your family. It is better for the organization that you find the way to restore, whether it's mind or body, that you're clear on your own sense of purpose, and it's the bringing out the best in you. So I think at that level, that's one thing that I think many organizations could adopt, is a real sense of intention. And you are seeing some organizations create the role of a chief well-being officer, which I think is quite interesting to pursue. And then I think there have been more tactical things just during the context of COVID is really encouraging people to activate flexible work schedules. Mm-hmm. If it's 1 o'clock in the afternoon and somebody needs to be doing something with their child and they're just simply unavailable for the next 2 hours, and so be it. That's what it has to be right now. And there has to be an acceptance that that's the way we're working during this moment. And that if you're transparent about when you're available to work, there's no baggage with that. That's just all of us trying to do right by our families and our communities, as well as our employers.
And I think there's a moment in time right now, and then there's the future, right? So right now, I think adding on to Liz, I think for those companies that can and should, is investing in managers, right? So not every manager understands how to have these conversations with their employees, right? So if we put in place policies around flexibility and childcare, great, that's a policy. If you don't actually invest in training your managers and your staff around having those conversations, how to enforce those, I use in a positive way, then it's a real problem, right? Because then HR takes the brunt of it, and then people walk out the door. So if we're not actually developing managers to understand the different situations that they're going to be coming up against, and many have never managed remotely, many people, you know, that path to promotion is often becoming a manager without actually helping to develop them as people managers. I think so that's that moment in time right now, so that we can stop the leak, right? We already had a leaky pipeline. Let's stop this massive leak and put a stop to that so that we're not losing more women. The other thing is, when we get back to whatever normal looks like, is that things can't go back to the way they were, right? So if we don't put these policies and the procedures and the training in place now, 6 months from now, 5 months, whatever that looks like a year from now, if we're not preparing people to have that, it can't just go back to, oh, you know, we're all vaccinated, and so now you can pick up those 15 extra hours again, and you can go back to traveling 5 days a week. I mean, we can't go back to what we had, and companies need to really recognize that and be prepared for those conversations and what that looks like. You know, I'll just add the last anecdotally, we talk so much about working moms, and we should, and the disproportionate impact and everything. 9% of that 5 million women that have left the workforce or don't have jobs are women ages 20 to 24. That's the next generation of the female population of workers, right, of employees. And so we have to make sure we're also caring for the young talent that has just entered the workforce, that's been remote, that's never met a manager, that's never developed a relationship with a colleague in person. And how does that look like today? And then when we, you know, go back to whatever the hybrid workforce looks like.
It's a really good point, Cate. And I think there are corporations, McKinsey, Salesforce, you know, that are genuinely thinking, okay, how do we transform the workplace to encourage this? And I think McKinsey's come out and said they no longer will do a 9 to 5 working day week where everyone needs to be in. And I think it's that kind of leadership and policy changes, deliberate and intentional policy changes, that we need. My anxiety comes from, well, what about the huge swathe of small, medium-sized businesses that may not be thinking in that way, or don't feel like economically they can think in that way? What advice would you give to them?
I mean, I'm a small company, right? You know, I left 3 giant organizations, 3 banks to create a small company. And while we don't have infrastructure that, you know, a Verizon or a McKinsey has, we certainly have the ability to understand the needs of our employees, right? And I think and small, medium-sized companies have the opportunity to really understand those challenges and put in place policies that can actually be enacted and enforced much easier and faster than big corporations that are matrix, that are global. This can start at the small size company, like thinking about just parental leave, sick leave, paying for COVID tests, right? Especially if you're having employees come back to the office, all the way to the big corporations that are employing hundreds of thousands of people and what they're doing. You know, again, back to Marin's point, I think each of us have a responsibility. And if you think you can't have an impact, you're wrong.
And Liz, what are you doing to support women at McKinsey?
Yeah, so I'll come back to that in 1 second. I just want to go back to the whole point of this small and medium enterprises and the role that women play in that, because, you know, small and medium enterprises play such an important role in overall employment in the United States in general. And so I think part of the lesson that I would hope goes out for women is a little bit more of a risk-taking mindset, a mindset to say, I can try something new. And small and medium enterprise plays such an important role in overall innovation and increased competitiveness of this country. And so the more that both policymakers and corporations are acting in support of the continued growth and innovation of small and medium enterprise, and that women are stepping forward and saying, yes, and I will play a role in that, that's what I think will bring back the employment of women and the successful employment of women to, you know, higher wage levels and to more supportive environments more quickly. Some of the things that we're doing at McKinsey, you know, they live a little bit, I don't want to say in the mundane, but a little bit more in the mundane, meaning they are things like creating flexibility in terms of days that are worked, creating backup childcare coverage plans, supporting mental health and wellness programs. So these are some of the things that we're doing to support our own employees. And then in the broader community where we're, I think, quite excited and seeing greater traction is just in a little bit greater collaboration across corporations to address the opportunity to create employment. And so, one example that we've been committed to for a very long period of time was the creation of a nonprofit called Generation. And the principle of Generation was when it was started around creating good jobs for youth, that all across the world, there are too many youth who do not have access to job opportunities, and creating leadership development programs and training programs for them that get them landed into strong paying jobs. And we recently have been lucky enough to see major commitments from BlackRock and Verizon and Microsoft to stand behind in financial support for Generation to expand those reskilling programs more broadly, which I think will be quite important during the COVID era. The other thing that we saw during COVID, which was really exciting, was a whole network of organizations from the travel industry that was obviously hit very hard to the retail industry that needed an unbelievable growth in number of colleagues working with them. And we created an overall AI platform that allowed basically for job matching. It allowed one employer to say, I have employees that are available because of the disruption caused by COVID, and another employer to say, I'm in great need of talent, and then to create basically a job market. And it was wonderful to see that kind of collaboration across business, all in the hopes of actually trying to stimulate employment.
And some of those things that you mentioned, Liz, they might seem mundane, but they're so important, I think, in bringing women back. Cate, sorry, I cut you there.
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly right. Mundane doesn't matter, right? A lot of this is back to basics, right, in hiring, and we're seeing, one of the things that I think is really important is what Liz said around reskilling, upskilling, right? Not every role has to be what that role looked like before. And I think reframing or reimagining what these roles can look like, what's the time given for these roles? Is it 4 days a week? Is it 3 days a week? I spent many years in the UK, as you know, Juliet, and there was a lot of conversation around job sharing. That seems to have passed. What about job sharing? If we can make it work, if individuals can make it work and it works for the company and performance, then let's do it. I think the other piece is delivering true on-ramps back into jobs. And part of that is, does that role look the same as it was a year ago? Can we look at that role in a different way? Does it have to be in person? That job may never have to come back into the office. You can listen to a lot of leaders and say, we need to get people back into the office. Our productivity levels got down. That's not for every role. And so I think there needs to be a massive shift in how we think about creation of roles, what skills are required. And oh, by the way, if that woman in this case doesn't have that skill, how do we get her there? How do we develop her so that we have that and she doesn't leave? Or as we're trying to bring women back into these jobs, that we can provide the training and the development so that they're successful and they don't walk out the door in another 6 months. We know that it costs more to hire, right? If we really start from scratch and invest in that talent early on and understand their skills and how we can continue to develop them, I think that removes a huge cost barrier in the long run.
And there are some great founded companies, the Second Shift being one, which we'll hear from Gina and Jenny, the founders, on Thursday, on how to bring highly skilled women back into the workplace in a more flexible way. I'm curious that there's a couple of questions that have come in, but I want to make sure we get to them. But how do we scale? How do we collectively come together and scale this? Because we all have great ideas, and Liz, you just touched on the fact that some industries are coming together to share thinking around this, but how do we accelerate this? How do we scale the progress, and what actions do we need to take collectively?
I think one of the things on scaling, honestly, is belief. Belief that it's the right thing over the long run, that it is actually, it's not just moral or fair, but it's actually better for the economy. Because more than anything, what will make this carry forth over the long run is the belief that it should and it can. So I would start with that. And then I think the second thing is it just requires quite a lot of challenging of convention and norms. And one of the things that happened during COVID, which I found quite interesting, was there were so many assumptions about the physical location that people needed to be in to be effective. And so, you would have a headquarters mindset, and only people who sit in headquarters are the people who have access to power because all the decisions are made in headquarters. And then the minute we went to an all virtual environment, the person with expertise is the one who people gravitated to. And so it was just completely flipped the paradigm on its head. And so I think the more we challenge certain sets of assumptions that have been always the way things have worked, the more that women will be able to rewrite the rules of business along the dimensions that work in their own lives.
And some of that is down to, a review, small, medium, and large enterprises, a review of your people practices. What are your people? What are your policies that are in place today? What can be changed? What are your recruiting practices? Where are you recruiting from, right? This goes women have been impacted. We're talking about women, but then you think more broadly around just diverse other representation and how that has been impacted as well. Within the shecession, the most impacted have been Black and brown women, right? And you look at the 3 sectors that have been paralyzed the most, that's where the majority of those women sit. So how do we also help? It's not just the JP Morgans and the Verizons of the world. They have a responsibility both to their own employees as well as their communities where they live, work, and serve. What about all of these other industries, as well as entrepreneurs, right? We saw this happen in 2008 after the financial crisis, right? You had more men starting companies. They had lost their jobs. You had a lot of women. We were seeing 1,800 new businesses start a day the last several years by women. You will see now more entrepreneurs that are women because they've left the workforce. They need more flexibility, but they also, to Liz's point, need income. They need to feed their families. They need to put food on the table. And so we also have to be prepared to support this next wave of women entrepreneurs and small businesses that are going to be created, again, in resources, education, tools, community, as well as financing and capital.
Yeah, one of the other things that I try to share with the group is that one of the other things that I talk about a fair amount internally is I feel like part of the unwritten rule of business in general, and certainly pre-COVID, was there's a perfection to my life. The mess that actually right at this moment exists behind my virtual screen that you can't see it, And I think the nature of COVID sort of inviting people into people's homes and the nature of really showing what it means to be in a more inclusive workplace is like, I am a human being and my life isn't perfect. And there's mess in my life, whether it's like physical mess in my house or whether it's mess in my life with my friends and my family. And every leader who shows that that is a part of their life says to the person that sits in the generation behind them, I can still be successful and have certain parts of my life a little bit messy. And I personally feel that that's just a much more authentic way of leading. And it's an expectation that the next generation has, that there is authenticity in how our leaders conduct themselves. But I think the byproduct of it is it will make the workplace much more inclusive to folks of all different backgrounds, whether women, people of color, and so forth. And so I hope that one of the silver linings of COVID is just a much more natural instinct for people to kind of show what is behind the curtain or what is behind the virtual screen.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, because I think at the start you sort of saw kids pop up, and I was always intrigued by how men were like, oh yeah, here's my kid, and the women were sort of apologizing for it. There's a great comment from Angela Scalpello on here. Hi Angela, she's saying we need to reimagine the world of work completely. We shouldn't be patching and mending, and I completely agree with that. I think there is an opportunity here for transformational change when it comes to the future workplace and how we set that up. But I think it comes to your point with leadership and leading with intentionality. A couple of other questions. There was a question around the role of government, and obviously there are bills being passed, and how do we think the stimulus bill will help women? Cate, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it's a joint effort, right? It's a collective effort. We know that the government, as we've seen this past year, particularly for small businesses and certain sectors, government stepping in. And this is a national crisis, right? This is a big issue that, to Liz's point, could last at least till the impact till 2024 and beyond. That's not even talking about the individual impact of lost income, lost opportunity, career stagnation. So I think that we have to, at the same time we're pushing government policy, there needs to be policy around leave, there needs to be policy around childcare, all of that. At the same time, the private institutions, the big companies, the small, medium, large, have to be changing their own policies. We can't wait for government. It's going to take a while. Where I personally feel like we can actually get some quick wins are with these companies that employ a lot of people, that are looking at programs, that are working with this Generation USA. I mean, there's real value in that, and redefining what your talent looks like. You mentioned the second shift. On-demand talent is a huge opportunity. If you know you no longer need someone in that seat 24 hours a day, why not expand your horizon and look for different talent? A lot of women are already sitting in that, so let's tap into it. So I think it's a collective effort. I think organizations like Worth and Luminary can equally play a part. And if we don't do it working together, we don't change anything, right? It gets stuck. The message and the change gets diluted, and we can't afford that.
Liz, your thoughts on how private and public work together?
Look, I mean, I think one thing that's just interesting to note is just, Biden's cabinet, right? By virtue of the cabinet that he chose, he's role modeling for, government and industry. What does it mean to be diverse and inclusive in your top team? And so I think in that way, that's a really interesting example of how government can, through signaling, show what can be done. I think that it's of the utmost importance that the actions of government now really support growth in the health of our businesses and our economies. The most important thing for folks is high quality, reasonable paying jobs being available in more numbers. And the way that investment is the path to that, I think that the notion of reskilling and the collaboration that can in particular exist at a local level between local employers, a local university, and local government to ensure that folks are clear on where there is new job opportunity for them and what they can personally do that gets them ready for it. I think that's another really important place where we need to see government stepping in.
I think you're both incredible leaders and clearly walking the walk when it comes to this subject. And I just want to say thank you for such a great conversation. Cate, I'm a huge fan of yours and the community that you've built at Luminary, and Liz, likewise. I love seeing what you're doing in the leadership space across well-being and support for women. So thank you both so much.
Thanks, Juliet.
Pleasure.